as I mentioned in the last presentation, I'm going to just hit some key minerals in Chapter 7, but that doesn't mean that the remaining minerals are not important, but you can read about those in the textbook. Minerals are inorganic, and which means that they don't have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and they're essential for human survival. They're stabilizing components of enzymes and proteins. They serve as cofactors for enzymes. They're involved in cell binding sites, stabilization of cellular structures, just to name a few of the functions. Minerals have no caloric value, however, they do carry a charge. They are not degraded by cooking or digestion. The key electrolytes are listed as sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, calcium, and phosphate. Minerals are classified as either trace or major. Major meaning that they're needed in greater amounts, trace meaning that they're needed in very micro amounts. The main electrolytes that are involved in fluid, in body fluid, are sodium, chlorine, magnesium, calcium, and potassium. These all are important to maintain good plasma volume, good blood volume, and very necessary for carrying nerve messages to muscles and also pH. The minerals that are and the benefits for athletes are listed in this slide. There are some that we really don't have difficulty getting, but in fact we consume far more than we probably need to. That being sodium. This adequate intake is 1,500, and the dietary guidelines suggest less than 2,300 milligrams. However, as I'll mention in the next slide, we have no problem getting that. So here you see the primary benefits of the different minerals, major minerals. So first let's look at sodium. It's usually digested as sodium chloride. Our normal intake is about 3,400 milligrams per day, and the upper limit for adults is 2,300 milligrams per day. So we primarily don't have a difficult time meeting our sodium needs. It's primarily found outside of the cells, and it's a key component of extracellular volume. So sodium loves water, and so with sodium comes a binding to water, and where one goes, the other one will follow. If sodium falls excessively low, there is difficulty maintaining mean arterial pressure, which we can just look at as blood pressure, and body temperature. When it becomes an issue is during difficult times in heat, exercise in heat, or movement in heat. So individuals working out in a hot environment in the summertime have a concern or pay attention to sodium. And the same holds true for athletes that have excrete a large amount of sodium in their sweat and also exercise for a long period of time in a hot environment. Potassium is found primarily inside of the cell, and it's found in good sources in bananas, citrus fruits, vegetables, milk. It's important for nerve transmission, for the heart muscles. However, if we have too much potassium outside of the cell, specifically inside the blood, which would be hyper elevated kalemia. Emia means blood, and potassium is noted with a K, so it's hyperkalemia. If you have excessively high blood potassium, it can lead to cardiac arrest or cardiac arrhythmia. And if you look at any true crime show, you can give somebody a big dose of potassium and that can cause cardiac arrest. So that's one of the fun things from true crime. Now, getting sufficient potassium has been a concern, but we have got new guidelines coming, and I'm not quite certain if it's still an issue. Sodium is primarily found in the extracellular space, and potassium is found in the intracellular space. When you have exercise in the heat for a long duration, an individual can have an excessive loss of sodium through this perspiration, through the sweat. And here you can see that white outline on the sweat locations on that t-shirt. It shows you that that's a big sodium excreter. If you lose a significant amount of sodium, an individual might have muscle cramping and some other issues which we'll look into the next chapter on water. But requirements may be a little elevated for certain athletes, but it's going to vary between individuals. Now, you will lose a little bit of potassium in your sweat too, but by far not anything compared to what you could lose with sodium. I wanted to mention magnesium as well. It is sometimes difficult for individuals or athletes to get enough magnesium. We find that in green leafy vegetables, whole grains, bananas, pinto beans, black beans, nuts, seeds, lentils. It's one of those important minerals that's necessary for a variety of functions in the body, nerve and muscle, heart, blood pressure, etc. It could be associated with cramping. Sometimes people will take magnesium supplements for restless leg syndrome. So there are some ways of getting that magnesium in. It's possible that it might be helpful, but it's not clear if it is. Calcium is important, as you already know, for teeth and bones. It's also necessary for muscle contraction, and it is difficult to understand or to monitor or assess calcium levels. The bone is consistently turning over, and we need calcium available for that. And if somebody doesn't have sufficient calcium in their diet, that's what leads us to osteopenia and osteoporosis. Supplements come in two forms: calcium citrate and carbonate. Carbonate is more alkaline. Has more elemental calcium per weight. The pills are smaller. You need to take less, but you have to take it with food. Calcium citrate is more acidic. It can be taken on an empty stomach. So there's a benefit for each, but the pills are bigger. We get sources of calcium in, of course, our dairy, leafy greens, almonds, and it really is a way of making sure that you get sufficient calcium is to take a supplement, but it needs to be taken a couple times because absorption is limited at 500 milligrams, and it's absorbed better in an acidic environment. Risks for insufficiency of calcium will be primarily with women, although it can happen with men as well. If somebody is not able to consume the common source of calcium, which is going to be our dairy sources, if someone has some intestinal inflammation like gluten intolerance or GI disorders, they could be at risk. You could not be insufficient when young kids are growing quickly. Certain medications and blood pressure medications, stomach acid reducers, they can cause disruption of the ability for calcium to be absorbed. Caffeine increases calcium excretion. If you're not getting enough vitamin D, or you drink too much of caffeinated or carbonated beverages, those put you at risk for insufficiency. Calcium is also lost in sweat. So here we again have individuals that are at high practice, high perspiration folks that can increase the risk of calcium loss. Individuals at risk are those that don't have or have abnormal menses, not getting sufficient calories, or again unable to consume dairy products. Iron is another mineral that's necessary to mention quickly, and we get it in the form of, or in our body, it transports oxygen. It's hemoglobin in the blood, myoglobin in the muscle, and it's also part of cytochromes in the mitochondria. So it's going to be involved in the energy production and oxygen carrying capacity. One thing to consider is that calcium interferes with iron absorption, and so if you can separate, not have a high calcium intake when you're focusing on getting your iron sources, it helps because it can improve iron absorption. If you take a calcium supplement and an iron supplement, there should be 1 to 2 hours apart because calcium is going to block iron uptake. Athletes are going to be at increased risk because, particularly women, because of their menses. Younger athletes might have a higher requirement, and if they're really limiting their caloric intake, that can cause a problem. Potentially runners with the breakup or increased broken vessels in the sole of their feet can change their iron capacity or their iron levels, and you lose it through sweat. The mechanical hemolysis is the because of the pounding on the feet with increased loss or breakdown of iron. Here we have myoglobin and hemoglobin. Myoglobin is in the muscle. It looks a little different than hemoglobin. Hemoglobin can carry 4. Myoglobin only has 1 subunit. It's found in muscle and cardiac muscle. Not normally found in the blood, but if somebody has a severe damage to a muscle and they can have that dumping of myoglobin, it actually is extremely dangerous. It does get filtered through the kidney and gets excreted in the urine. That's like blood in the urine. It's called rhabdomyolysis. So a serious muscle injury can actually be extremely damaging, and that's why we want to be mindful of injuries with our athletes as well. Iron intake does not support it if they are having sufficient iron. But if somebody is deficient in their iron, an iron supplement can be helpful. The only problem is if you take too much, it causes constipation and it does not help performance. So being in the right value is really important. Here we have some athletes, specific athletes that might be at risk for insufficient iron. And you can see the individuals that focus on weight loss, low energy intake, they can be at risk. Drastic weight loss with weight class sports can be at risk. Vegetarian diets, not getting enough iron in the diet or losing it through sweat in hot, humid conditions. So supplements during foods, supplement versus foods. Well, sometimes it's difficult to obtain sufficient quantities in the diet. With that, we have to look at athlete preferences and correcting deficiencies. And so here we have food first, but not always food only. When to use dietary supplements in sport. So if you have an athlete that just does not like the food that has the nutrient that sometimes you have to have a supplement to help with that, and that's completely acceptable. You want to use supplements where there are concerns about hygiene or contamination, so that could be with travel, for example. And almost done. Trace minerals. Want to mention trace minerals, and this is just a kind of a overview, a big view. When we do your reading in the chapter about these trace minerals like chromium and cobalt, selenium. Well, several trace minerals have direct association with insulin resistance, which can ultimately lead to diabetes. And it suggested that these altered levels can amplify the pathways that result in insulin resistance and diabetes. So be aware that although we talk about the major minerals, these trace minerals are also very important in terms of the bigger functions of the human body. For both chapters, having the recommended vitamins and minerals can help improve performance as compared to a deficient state. Going above the recommended amount does not lead to better performance. Key vitamins would be vitamin D and the Bs and calcium, I honestly believe. And we want to look at the minerals sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and iron. Those are the key minerals for our athletes. And that is the mineral chapter, wrapped up in a tiny bow.